I had been living in the dilapidated Ashford house for nearly 5 years, a sprawling, time-worn mansion hidden deep in the backwoods of rural Vermont. The wind would whip through the barren trees on chilly autumn nights, carrying with it a strange, lulling melody that seemed to seep through the walls. It was a lullaby, both enchanting and ominous, its verses haunting my sleepless nights under the glow of a full moon. I had moved here right after graduating from college, accepting a teaching job in this remote community. My days were spent tutoring young Samuel, a bright but restless 8-year-old whose boundless energy often sent him scampering about the vast, unkempt yard behind the house. The yard itself was an old remnant of a once proud orchard, now overtaken by gnarled apple trees and wild ivy, a perfect backdrop for the solitude I so craved. The house was known around town as Old Ashford, a relic of faded grandeur with its 5 creaking steps leading to a grand, sagging porch. Locals would refer to it as that old house, a place shrouded in both mystery and melancholy. I, however, had grown fond of its quiet despair and the endless space it offered for introspection. It wasn't until one cool, eerie evening, one of those nights when the fog crept in like a living thing, that I first heard the uncanny lullaby. I was alone in my modest study, a room adjacent to the grand parlor, where I often sat by the window to grade papers and compose letters. The lullaby started softly, a plaintive tune that weaved through the branches of the ancient apple trees. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, an auditory illusion crafted by my tired mind. But as the nights wore on, the tune grew clearer, more insistent, and undeniably real. I began to notice peculiar details. The melody seemed to emanate from the old swing set that had long been abandoned in the corner of the yard. A swing that should have been motionless, its faded chains inert against the chill night air. Yet, on moonlit evenings, the swing would sway gently as if guided by unseen hands. I had often watched Samuel playing near it during the day, but he had never mentioned any odd sounds or moving shadows. The townsfolk, too, were tight-lipped about the history of the swing, dismissing any talk of its supernatural qualities with a nervous chuckle and a shake of the head. My curiosity soon became an obsession. I confided in Miss Parker, the longtime housekeeper who had served the Ashford family for decades. Her eyes, shadowed by secrets, darted nervously whenever I broached the subject. "There's no such thing as a singing swing," she would say, her voice trembling slightly. Yet even she could not fully dismiss the chill that ran down her spine when the lullaby echoed in the dead of night. One fateful evening, determined to uncover the truth behind the eerie serenade, I set out under the pale light of the full moon. I left the safety of my study and crept through the overgrown grass toward the swing. The air was thick with mist, and every sound, the rustling leaves, the creak of old wood, seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. As I neared the swing, I noticed something that made my heart pound. The door to the parlor, visible through a narrow gap in the ivy, had just been closed. I knew for certain that no one else should have been awake at this hour. Pausing at the edge of the yard, I stared at the swing. It hung there, unmoving as if suspended in time, its chains reflecting the silver light of the moon. But then, just as I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, I saw it. A faint silhouette, barely perceptible in the swirling mist, appeared to be seated on the swing. For a split second, the figure was there, head bowed as though lost in a sorrowful lullaby. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. I stood frozen in terror and disbelief. My rational mind urged me to dismiss it as a trick of the light, a figment born from exhaustion and isolation. Yet deep within, I felt an undeniable shiver of dread. I had to know what or who was behind that spectral presence in the relentless lullaby that haunted these nights. The following nights were a blur of unease and restless investigation. My once familiar home had transformed into a labyrinth of hidden meanings and ghostly whispers. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind against the dilapidated siding, now seemed to carry a sinister subtext, a coded message from beyond the veil of the ordinary. Unable to resist the lure of the unknown, I began to document every occurrence. I kept a detailed journal, scribbling down the times the lullaby emerged and the exact position of the swing each time I observed it. The more I recorded, the more patterns emerged, patterns that hinted at a connection between the spectral figure and the rhythm of the night. The lullaby's tempo and cadence seemed to sync with the gentle creaks of the swing. But when I attempted to follow the trail of these clues, the mystery only deepened. One particularly bitter winter evening, as a storm loomed on the horizon, I resolved to stay awake past midnight. Bundled in a worn cardigan and armed with my journal and a flashlight, I positioned myself near the window that overlooked the swing. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes and carrying the distant echoes of a forlorn song. I sat frozen, my heart thudding in my chest as the minutes crawled by. At precisely 12:13 a.m., the lullaby began again, a soft, melancholic melody that seemed to be coaxing me out of my hiding spot. This time, however, the figure on the swing did not vanish immediately. I could discern a slight movement, a subtle rocking, as if the apparition was lost in thought, or perhaps compelled to relive some forgotten memory. Its form was more distinct in the intermittent flashes of my flashlight. A woman in an old-fashioned dress, her face partially obscured by shadow, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The spectral figure's presence was both sorrowful and unnerving. My rational mind fought to convince me that I was simply witnessing a trick of the light. Yet the raw intensity of my fear and the palpable aura of grief that enveloped the figure left me with no doubt that something inexplicable was at work. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no random haunting, but a deliberate, spectral echo of a story long buried in the corridors of Ashford House. Over the following days, I began probing the dark history of the mansion. In the local archives at the county courthouse, I discovered that the house had once belonged to the Ashford family, a lineage riddled with tragedy and secrets. One record in particular caught my eye, a long-forgotten account of a young woman named Evelyn Ashford, whose life had been marred by loss and despair. Rumors whispered that she had once been driven to madness by a series of personal tragedies, and that on a cold winter night, she had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only the echoes of a haunting lullaby that no one could ever explain. Armed with this new knowledge, I began to suspect that the spectral figure might be Evelyn herself, forever bound to the swing where she had last been seen. But why would she persist in singing that melancholy lullaby? The answer remained elusive, as if locked behind a veil of time and sorrow. I also questioned the peculiar behavior of Miss Parker, the housekeeper, and even Mr. Daniels, a reclusive neighbor known for his uncanny understanding of the local folklore. When I inquired discreetly, both dismissed my concerns with vague remarks about old ghosts and troubled memories. Their evasive responses only fanned the flames of my curiosity and dread. That night, determined to confront the mystery head-on, I prepared for another vigil. I set up a small recording device near the swing, hoping to capture the elusive lullaby in its full, eerie beauty. As midnight approached, the wind subsided to a tense silence, and the faint strains of the song began to whisper through the cold air. This time, as I inched closer to the swing, the figure appeared again, more solid, more desperate. Her eyes, now visible in the trembling beam of my flashlight, seemed to plead for something long lost. A shudder ran through me. The connection between the spectral lullaby, the haunted swing, and Evelyn's tragic past was undeniable. I knew then that my journey into the heart of Ashford House's dark secrets was only just beginning. That same night, as I fumbled with the recording device near the swing, the oppressive silence was broken by a sudden gust of wind that swept through the overgrown yard. I clutched my flashlight tighter, its beam quivering as if mirroring my own uncertainty. The spectral figure of Evelyn reappeared, her presence now seeming less like a fading memory and more like an urgent plea from the past. I edged closer, heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the creaks of the ancient swing. The recording device was rolling, capturing every whisper of the wind and the faint strains of the melancholic lullaby. As the seconds stretched into an eternity, the spectral woman slowly turned her head toward me. Her eyes, ghostly and desperate, met mine, and for an instant, The weight of her sorrow was all too palpable. A series of fragmented voices, like echoes from a distant time, invaded my mind. I wasn't sure if they were real or simply the product of my mounting dread. They spoke in half-remembered phrases, mingling grief with an inexplicable sense of warning. In that moment, I realized that Evelyn's tragic tale was far more complex than mere abandonment. There was a hidden anguish, a secret festering beneath the surface of this long-forgotten tragedy. Compelled by a mixture of terror and empathy, I broke the paralyzing stillness. "Evelyn, what do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the soft hum of the wind. The response was a faint, almost imperceptible murmur, a murmur that felt like a plea rather than an answer. It was as if the very air was infused with her longing, carrying the weight of regrets and lost dreams. As the night deepened, the supernatural elements intensified. The swing began to move rhythmically on its own, its creaking chains producing an eerie counterpoint to the spectral lullaby. I felt as though I was being drawn into a trance, caught between the tangible reality of Ashford House and a haunting realm of unresolved sorrow. The ghostly figure hovered on the swing for what seemed like hours, her form flickering in and out of focus, each appearance leaving a residue of cold despair in the air. Desperate to learn more, I retraced my steps to the study, where I had previously scoured the local archives. There, hidden among brittle pages and yellowed letters, lay a faded photograph of a young woman in a period dress, her eyes identical to the sorrowful gaze I'd witnessed. The back of the photograph bore a handwritten note: Evelyn Ashford, 1923. The significance of the date sent shivers down my spine. How could a spirit from nearly a century ago be so desperately clinging to this place? That very morning, I combed through the local newspaper archives and discovered several mentions of a mysterious disappearance at the Ashford estate in the early 1920s. The details were murky: a young woman, a missing child, whispers of scandal, and hints of a forbidden love that ended in heartbreak. Each snippet of information deepened the mystery. It seemed that Evelyn's life had been a tapestry of hidden sorrows, with the swing perhaps serving as both a relic of happier days and a symbol of unbearable loss. I couldn't help but wonder if the lullaby itself was a remnant of those long-forgotten days, a bittersweet refrain that echoed through generations. Had Evelyn composed it in her moments of despair, or was it an inherited melody that bound her spirit to Ashford House? As I contemplated these questions, the eerie melody returned, this time more insistent than ever. It felt as though it was calling out to me, urging me to delve further into the painful past that clung to every corner of the house. The experience left me with an overwhelming urge to uncover the truth behind Evelyn's sorrow. I resolved to revisit every hidden nook of Ashford House, to sift through the secrets buried in its creaking walls and shadowed corridors. But as I made that silent vow, a deep, resonant thought echoed in my mind. Some mysteries might be better left undisturbed. Even so, the pull of that spectral lullaby was irresistible. In the weeks that followed, the boundaries between reality and nightmare began to blur. I found myself wandering the dark corridors of Ashford House at odd hours, compelled by an inexplicable need to uncover every hidden secret. Late one night, drawn by the persistent echo of the spectral lullaby, I ventured into a part of the mansion I'd never dared explore, a narrow, dust-choked passage behind the library. The air grew colder as I descended a creaking flight of stairs that led to a forgotten wing of the house. Here, the walls were lined with peeling wallpaper and faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. In the dim glow of my flashlight, I discovered a small room that appeared to have been a nursery long ago. The remnants of a life once tender and filled with hope lay scattered about. A shattered music box, a broken rocking horse, and a dusty mobile that hung eerily above a lone window. It was in that forsaken room that I encountered a series of cryptic messages scrawled on the wall in shaky, desperate handwriting. Phrases like, "I miss him and never let go," sent chills racing down my spine. They were intermingled with symbols that I couldn't decipher, perhaps remnants of a secret language or coded pleas from a tortured soul. The inscriptions hinted at a love that had turned bitter and a loss too profound for words. Was this the true heart of Evelyn's sorrow? A sudden gust of wind rattled the broken window, and I instinctively turned toward the sound. In the moonlit gloom, I saw the faint outline of a figure, a mirror image of the woman I had seen on the swing, yet standing in the doorway of the nursery. Her form was insubstantial, draped in translucent fabric that flowed like smoke around her. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The spectral presence extended a trembling hand toward me, as if begging for help or forgiveness. I reached out, my hand trembling as much from fear as from a surge of desperate empathy. In that fleeting moment, an overwhelming rush of memories not my own flooded my mind. I saw flashes of a happier past, Evelyn cradling a baby with gentle smiles and quiet lullabies, followed by a sudden descent into despair, betrayal, and ultimately disappearance. It was as though the ghost was trying to reveal the whole tragic saga of her life to me in an instant. As the vision receded, the figure dissipated like mist in the early dawn, leaving me alone with my pounding heart and a lingering sense of loss. I realized that the spectral lullaby, the moving swing, and the hidden nursery were all pieces of a puzzle, a story of love, abandonment, and the eternal longing for a child that never came to be. Evelyn's spirit was bound to this house, trapped by memories too painful to relinquish, and a yearning so deep it echoed through every creak of the floorboards. Shaken but resolute, I returned to my study and pored over every scrap of historical data I could find. The local records spoke of a scandal, a forbidden love that shattered the Ashford legacy. Rumors hinted that Evelyn had been ostracized after her lover left her, and in her grief, she had taken to singing the lullaby every night, hoping, perhaps, that her lost dreams would return. The knowledge only deepened my empathy, and an unsettling resolve began to take root within me. I must help her find the closure that had eluded her in life. That very night, as the full moon ascended high into the starless sky, I stood once again beneath the swing. The air was charged with an eerie stillness, and the world felt as if it were holding its breath. The swing swayed gently without wind, its chains creaking softly in time with the distant, mournful lullaby. I approached and sat down, determined to confront whatever forces had woven themselves into the fabric of this haunted legacy. A cold sensation crept over me as I clutched the ancient swing's chains. The lullaby began, a soft, ghostly melody that vibrated in the marrow of my bones. In that moment, I sensed that I was not alone. The presence of Evelyn was stronger than ever, hovering in the periphery of my vision, her sorrowful eyes pleading silently for the solace that had eluded her for so long. I could only wonder, would tonight bring the revelation and release she, and perhaps I, so desperately sought? That night, as the spectral lullaby swelled to a crescendo, the boundaries between the living and the dead seemed to collapse. I sat on the ancient swing, its chains cold and unyielding beneath my trembling fingers, and allowed the melancholic melody to envelop me. Every note pulsed with the weight of decades of sorrow, and I could almost feel the pulse of a heart beating in tandem with the creaks of the aged wood. Time itself appeared to slow as I sank deeper into a trance-like state. Shadows lengthened around me, and the world faded into a wash of silvery moonlight and swirling mist. In that ethereal half-light, the figure of Evelyn materialized more clearly than ever before, no longer a ghostly whisper at the edge of perception, but a vivid, sorrow-drenched presence. Her eyes, brimming with despair and longing, met mine with a plea that transcended words. "Help me!" Her silent cry echoed in the cavernous stillness of my mind. In that charged moment, I felt the full weight of her tragic existence, a woman imprisoned by heartbreak, betrayed by fate, and condemned to wander this decaying estate, forever clutching the memory of a love lost and a child never born. The specter of Evelyn reached out as if to bridge the chasm between our worlds, her translucent fingers barely grazing my own. Driven by a mix of empathy and the unyielding compulsion to free her from her torment, I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm here. I want to help." The words seemed to reverberate in the cold night air, mingling with the ghostly cadence of the lullaby. A sudden, bone-chilling gust of wind whipped through the yard, scattering leaves and stirring the dust of forgotten years. In that tumultuous moment, the swing began to sway violently, as though caught in a maelstrom of pent-up grief and regret. Visions of Evelyn's past flooded my senses, a happier time when laughter filled sunlit rooms, a tender embrace shared beneath whispered promises, and the silent agony of a dream unfulfilled. Each image was accompanied by a searing ache, a plea for redemption and release from the sorrow that had anchored her spirit to this desolate place. The melody deepened, transforming into a dirge that spoke of lost chances and irrevocable despair. As the crescendo built, I felt a profound shift within me. The boundaries of self and other blurred. I was no longer a mere witness but a participant in this spectral drama. The air around the swing shimmered with a surreal luminescence, and for a heartbeat, I sensed that I was suspended in a timeless space where past and present converged. It was in that liminal space that I realized the true nature of the haunting. Evelyn's longing was not just for the child she never had. It was for the possibility of love and life itself, a chance to be whole. In a final act of desperate connection, I reached out, placing my palm against the cool metal of the swing. The sound of creaking chains merged with a final, heart-wrenching note of the lullaby. The spectral figure of Evelyn shuddered, her form rippling like a disturbed reflection in a dark pond. For a long, agonizing moment we were united, her sorrow mingling with my resolve, until the intensity of the moment released a burst of luminous energy. The figure of Evelyn slowly dissolved into the night, leaving behind a profound silence that was as heavy as it was liberating. In the aftermath, the swing stilled, its movement ceasing as if it had fulfilled its long-held duty. The oppressive atmosphere that had haunted Ashford House for decades lifted ever so slightly, replaced by a fragile, bittersweet calm. Though the spectral lullaby no longer echoed with the same relentless despair, its memory remained etched in every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of the wind. In the days that followed, I continued my work at Ashford House with a renewed sense of purpose. Samuel's laughter once again filled the vast yard, and the old mansion, with all its secrets and scars, began to breathe a quiet relief. Yet, I often found myself gazing at the swing with a lingering sadness, a silent tribute to the woman who had once been so desperately alone. I kept the journal of my encounters close, not as a record of fear, but as a testament to the fragile boundaries between life and death, and the enduring power of a love unfulfilled. For me, the experience served as a reminder that sometimes, to set a soul free, one must confront the darkness head-on, embracing even the most haunting of memories. And though the ghostly lullaby had faded, its echoes lived on, a spectral refrain that forever changed the heartbeat of Ashford House.